Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Borderlands 3 video. Today we are going over a Zane build that is the most reliable to get through the raid without any DLC or the See Undead class mod, and it's actually way more powerful than it was before. We're talking about Calm, Cool, and Collected. This is the OG Zane mobbing build for all you Zane players who played before the DLC came out, and I'm going to be updating it today for you guys at level 53. So before we get into it, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more Borderlands 3 Mayhem 4 Zane builds. Don't forget to join the Zane Nation Discord channel. Link will be in a pinned comment down below. And if you would like to hit the bell to turn on post notifications, I would appreciate it. So what's really cool about Calm, Cool, and Collected right now is we actually have a lot of updates to the build, and it actually does quite well in the takedown in my opinion. I would say the hardest part of the takedown is actually Wotan himself, which is actually quite unlike the current Zane build. Wotan seems to be the easiest part of the raid, for me at least. But yeah, the entire raid up to that point is like super easy. It's pretty simple with this build. So I'm going to break it down for you guys, and I'm going to give you guys some important tips afterwards for making the Valkyrie fights like literally so easy, and it's a really old trick that lots of people used to use. But yeah, this build can struggle otherwise with the Valkyries or Wotan, unless you use a couple tricks. So first, let's go over the level 53 skill trees. This build gets a lot more than it did before with the new extra skill points. So the main difference is we now get a decent amount of extra points out of our blue tree. The extra reload speed, just normal speed, salvation, all that stuff is really nice to keep the flow of your mobbing going. This is a mobbing build, but to keep that flow very nicely so that the parts that you're good at you can do even faster. But it's a pretty standard skill tree otherwise. Keep in mind, I didn't choose Adrenaline. There's almost no point to using that in this build, and if you have Guardian rank, Adrenaline and Topped Off don't work well together. Now, the main issue is when our barrier goes down, we will have to duck for cover, but all we need to do is freeze an enemy, and we get our action skills right back. And the last thing I want to mention is make sure you're taking Detainment Field. That turns your barrier into a huge shock ball. It's very important for getting through the Valkyries. Like I mentioned, I'm going to go into that in more depth in a minute. So that's pretty much it for the skill trees. It's a very standard Calm, Cool, Collected build with some extra skill points now. But let's get into the gear. And then I'm going to give you guys, like I said, the best tips for getting through the raid. Now, when it comes to the weapons in this build, we are actually using a decent amount of different items, but it's pretty simple once you have this gear. Now, the main weapon and update to this build is the redistributor. Any redistributor with Sentinel Cryo will freeze enemies back to back to back. You don't have to have a cryo-based redistributor, and it's much better to have a non-cryo redistributor with Sentinel Cryo. If you guys notice, we're doing great work with our redistributor. This almost doesn't look any different than the meta See Undead builds right now. This gun is so useful, and it's so good with Zane barrier, chaining on every single shot, and this is the best addition to this build. We weren't really using this until we realized how powerful it was with the See Undead class mod, but it's actually just super powerful with Zane in general. So next, I'm actually using a Brainstormer. This gun is very good for two reasons. Number one, when our barrier goes down, the redistributor is not as powerful anymore, so it's great to have a backup, all-around great mobbing weapon. And then on top of that, the other reason this is actually very good to have on you is that this is a multi-pellet weapon. So once again, if your barrier does go down, you can swap to this, aim at a head, get that brain freeze triggered. You almost don't need a Maggie if you keep some extra multi-pellet weapons with you. The Maggie is still very good in this build, obviously, for single targets, but since we're mobbing most of the time, you really want to focus on these chain weapons. And finally, I'm going to mention the Maggie. I highly suggest farming for the barrier crit anointment. This is, even though I said it's not required, it is very nice to have this on you for the single targets, like when you have one heavyweight left at the end, or the cryo heavyweights. And that's why I highly suggest the barrier, crit, and accuracy anointment. You actually want a good single target weapon without Sentinel Cryo. And the Maggie is a great option because it's very good at freezing anyway. And then on top of that, you get that bonus crit damage. It's honestly, I highly suggest this anointment over Sentinel Cryo. And then the second reason for this anointment is that this kind of turns this into a little sniper from medium to long range. You can get very good freezes off, where with the normal accuracy of the Maggie, it's harder once you're not in close range. Finally, in our last 2 slots, we have 2 different bossing weapons. I highly suggest trying to farm for each of these. You want both of these in 2 different elements. So those 2 weapons are the Cutsman and the Dictator. Now, ultimately, you're just going to want to element match wherever you are in the game. So, like, obviously, if you're fighting a Flesh boss, you want a Fire Dictator or Cutsman. But for the Maliwan Takedown, we want a Shock and a Corrosive of each of these. Now, it's not 100% required, but if you have a Shock and Corrosive Dictator and a Shock and Corrosive Cutsman, it's going to make your life 10 times easier. The Dictator is specifically good against the Valkyries and Wotan's head, and it's good against the Krakens. And the Cutsman is good against, like, pretty much only Wotan you want the Cutsman for. The Dictator is still good against Wotan, but you really want just the raw power of the Cutsman. And the Cutsman is also good versus the Krakens. I don't like using the Cutsman on the Valkyries, and I'm going to tell you guys why. And then another reason to have a Dictator is it's actually just very good at mobbing in general, and it's very good with Brain Freeze. It's very good with triggering Calm Cool Collected. So I highly suggest farming for each element of these 2 weapons. Now, on to our items. We are actually using the Executor class mod. Once again, I highly suggest trying to farm for a good one with as many points of good misfortune as possible, and then look for some good stat rolls. This might be the best class mod for mobbing, besides See and Dead, obviously, but this is a non-See and Dead build. The extra kills with good misfortune is going to help your Calm Cool Collected. It's going to make it run kind of smoothly. On top of that, the effect of the Executor with the crit damage, the status effect chance, that's going to help your build because the status effect chance goes towards your cryo efficiency. It's a pretty solid class mod, and I highly suggest it for mobbing. And then for bossing, the Executor does nothing for bossing since we're not triggering our kill skills without killing enemies. I highly suggest looking for a class mod with lots of points in synchronicity, or you could even just run an anti-freeze. Pretty much like I said, since we're not getting kills while bossing, you just want a different class mod that's actually just going to give you straight up damage. Now for the shield, this is actually kind of important. I highly suggest running a Big Boom Blaster or a Band of Sidorak. These 2 shields have very fast recharge delays and rates. Now the Band of Sidorak doesn't have a lot of survivability attached to it, and that's why the Big Boom Blaster is great. It has a little bit bigger capacity, and then the boosters give you a couple extra shots. It's like a really fast recharging shield, but with some tankiness behind it. On top of that, if you want to, you can even carry an RPG in this build with your Big Boom Blaster and get ammo that way. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, I actually suggest looking for an element on action skill end on your shield. I know it seems weird, but hear me out. When your barrier goes down, that's when you're most vulnerable. When you go into fight for your life, it's really bad for you because all of your skills go down in fight for your life for whatever reason. But having an element on action skill end, when your barrier goes down, it gives you that bonus damage, and I promise it's going to help you out. Now, when it comes to the grenade, you actually want to run any Hex Grenade, a Quasar, I believe a Stormfront would even be okay. Any grenade that actually crits a lot. You don't actually need a Cryo Hex Grenade. You want a Hex Grenade that targets crit spots, because those will actually trigger Brain Freeze. Now, more importantly, you want the anointment for 25% damage on grenade throw. You really just want more base damage in this build. And for bossing, you can use a Piss Grenade. Now for the artifact, we're obviously running an Icebreaker. It just adds some good damage to the build overall. And yeah, that's pretty obvious. Just look for good rolls. Alrighty, so that is the build. I tried to cover it as quick as possible and pack all the info in there. Now I actually want to go over the couple strategies I was talking about to get through the takedown 10 times easier. So the mobbing parts with this build should be very straightforward. The redistributor kills everything. You actually should have 0 problems mobbing, like, at all. Just keep a redistributor, a brainstormer, your Maggie, and then the corrosive dictator equipped. So that way for the first part you're ready for the Kraken with the Dictator. But the Redistributor literally clears through everything. You don't need a See Undead class mod to make this gun good. It's actually just Zane's barrier that makes the Redistributor so powerful, so you should have no trouble mobbing. If you do, you can always ask questions in the comments. But let's get into the Valkyries. There's a pretty simple trick to make this fight so easy. You're probably watching the footage on the screen right now. Now the main guns you're going to want to use are the Dictators. We are using the old Zane the Bully trick from Lazy Data. Now this is a pretty obvious trick if you read Detainment Field, but basically you can just rock back and forth and bump into the Valkyries over and over and over again. They're never able to do their attacks. And you just use the Dictator to quickly get their health bars down. And then the last thing you should know, as long as you're hitting crits, even though you don't freeze them, you will trigger Calm, Cool, and Collected. So just kind of jiggle your Dictator up and down. Make sure you're hitting crit spots. So that's a really simple way to get through that fight. Now let's talk about Wotan. The Wotan fight is probably the hardest part of the raid for this build because it is an extended boss fight. Most of the phases are actually pretty easy because you have the mobs to proc your kill skills and you have the mobs to proc Calm, Cool, Collected. But once Wotan splits and they stop spawning mobs for you to, you know, proc your skills, then you basically just have to kind of slow down a bit. The main issue is you can't heal with salvation or refreshments, which without killing an enemy or freezing an enemy, which you can't do to the bottom or the top half. So either try to keep some mobs into that phase, or just take things really slow. That's kind of the main advice I can give you. What I ended up doing was throwing my barrier down and just not picking it up at all and being completely protected. You know, no splash damage could get under it. If you're not picking up your barrier, you like actually can't get hurt unless enemies get inside. But Wotan or the top half aren't going to do that. And then I just use my Dictator to shoot at them. And it took a couple cycles, probably like 2 cycles to finish off the head, and then a couple more to finish off Wotan. And whenever my barrier wasn't up, I just went and hid. Now that's pretty much it for the build and the video. I just wanted to update this build for those who don't have the DLC or the See Undead class mod, because you can still pretty easily get through the raid, even on true takedown mode, which is the mode that I'm in. With Calm, Cool, and Collected, it's a really solid build. The Redistributor is a huge help, which no one has talked about this gun with Calm, Cool, Collected, because we've all been playing See Undead. And yeah, I just wanted to update it for you guys. So if you liked the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Join the Discord if you want to. Link will be in a pinned comment down below. And like I said, if you want to hit the notification bell, I'd appreciate it. But that's going to be it for me, guys. I'll see you in the next one. I'm out.